Das Surleute jan vergep sau fun thing what ban lin Mike. Kom geikt fun kike. Cho sua ching. Ko 3 weeks later of fun mo, da doi tang mo kuf ve mui mort ngai. I set the folder down on the kitchen table between us, and I told Paulette that I had read enough closing documents in 31 years to know exactly what this one was. She stopped smiling. Across the table, my daughter-in-law went dead still, because she had just seen her own name signed on the second page, on a line she swore to God she never signed. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a television laughed at nothing, and Paulette folded her hands like a woman at church and said it was for the family. I looked at her a long moment. Then I said, "No, Paulette, it was never for the family. It was for you, and you used your own daughter to do it, and I am not going to sit here and let you finish. My name is Corinne Aldrich. I am 63 years old. I have a bad hip and a good memory, and for 31 years I worked as a real estate and probate paralegal in a small law office off Main Street, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my whole life reading the paperwork that other people sign without reading. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments, and please stay with me until the end, because what happened in that house did not start at that kitchen table. It started quiet, the way these things always do. With a phone call on a Tuesday and a stack of paper nobody thought to look at twice. Let me back up. I have lived in the same town for 31 years, in the same house, on a street where I know which neighbors wave and which ones just nod. My husband Ellis passed 4 years ago this coming spring. Some mornings the back closet still smells like him, like cedar and the aftershave he never switched brands on in 40 years. And I keep meaning to clean it out and I keep not doing it. And I have made my peace with being that kind of widow. The house is too big for one woman. I know that. Everybody keeps telling me that like it's news. I raised one son here, Wesley. He's 35 now, which does not seem possible, since I can still see him at 9 years old with a busted kitchen window and that little hitch in his breath right before he lied to me. He never could lie to me clean. He'd take this tiny breath first, this little catch, and I'd know before he opened his mouth. 35 years old and he still does it. You'll want to remember that, because it matters later. Wesley does construction, site supervision, big commercial jobs, the kind that pull him out of state for months at a stretch. Good money, hard hours, and a wife at home who learned real early that marrying a man who builds things means you spend a lot of nights building your own life around the empty side of the bed. Her name is Nora. She's 33. She works pediatric nursing over at the Children's Hospital. The long shifts, the ones where she comes home and can't talk for an hour because she's still carrying somebody else's sick kid around in her chest. I love that girl. I want to say that plain, right at the front, because she gets lost in this story more than once, and I won't have it. Nora is the kind of person who does things instead of saying things. When I'd come visit, once a month or so, a long weekend, she'd have coffee made and sitting on the counter for me before her shift. No note, no fuss, just there. That was her way. Quiet, practical kindness. She'd never in a million years make a scene. And I have lived long enough to know that the ones who won't make a scene are exactly the ones who get walked on. Because the world runs on squeaky wheels and Nora never once learned how to squeak. 3 years ago, I helped them buy the house. And I want to be precise about that word. Helped, because it matters to me even now. I did not give them the house. I put in $60,000 toward the down payment when the rates were climbing like a fever, and the prices out in Westerville had gone flat out insane, and they were 40,000 short of the kind of loan that wouldn't bury them. So I wrote the check. It was most of what Ellis left me that wasn't the house. I never regretted it for one single day. Here's the thing, though, and I knew it the day I wrote that check, because I've read 1,000 deeds, and I know exactly how these things work. That $60,000 bought me nothing, not one legal inch of that house. My name is not on the deed. It is not on the mortgage. It is not anywhere. What I gave them was a gift, and a gift is not a claim. And anybody who's ever sat across a closing table from a family fight knows the two things are worlds apart. So I never once acted like I owned a piece of that place. I want you to understand that about me going in. Whatever leverage I had in what's coming, it was never the money. It was that I knew how to read. The house itself is a nice one. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a maple out back that goes the color of a struck match every October, and a bird feeder Nora keeps stocked all winter because she told me once the cardinals mate for life and the same pair comes back every year. I thought about that for about a week after she said it. There's a guest room upstairs with a window facing that maple, painted a soft sage green, and I helped Wesley paint it the spring they moved in. He got a stripe of it on his ear and didn't notice till dinner. That was a good day. I remember thinking, standing in that half-painted room with paint on my son's ear, that this is what it looks like when a thing goes right. I visited about once a month, stayed in that sage green room. It was for 3 years. The closest thing I had to somewhere I still belonged. And then Wesley called on a Tuesday. Nothing important ever happens on a Tuesday, which is exactly why I remember it. I was standing at my own kitchen sink with my hands in dishwater when the phone went, and I saw his name. And I picked up wet and dripping like I always do, because it's my kid and you answer. Mom, he said. And then before I could even say hello back, he said, don't be upset. Now, I have been alive 63 years, and I will tell you something for free. When a person opens with, don't be upset, being upset is the only sane response left to you. That is not a request. That is a weather report. So I dried one hand on my hip and I said, well, I'm upset now, so you might as well tell me. And there it was, that little breath, that 9-year-old hitch. He told me Nora's folks were going to come stay with them for a while. Just a while, he said. Her dad, Roland, had a heart thing, a bypass, the real deal, cracked chest and everything. And he was going to need weeks to get back on his feet. And Nora's mother didn't drive on the highway, and their own place was clear the hell out past Dayton, an hour from the good hospital and 40 minutes from any family that mattered. Wesley and Nora were 20 minutes from the cardiac center. It made sense. Of course it made sense. Everything that happened in that house made sense, one reasonable piece at a time. And that right there is the whole entire trick of it. That's the thing I want you to hold on to, because I didn't hold on to it soon enough. I said, of course, honey, that's what family does. Whatever they need. Because what else do you say? Your son calls. His father-in-law's chest just got sawed open. The man needs somewhere to heal. You say yes. You say, of course. You don't say, let me read the fine print first. You don't say, who exactly is going to be sleeping where, and for how long, and whose idea was this really? And why does your voice have that same careful sound it had the time you backed the car into the mailbox? You don't ask any of that. You say, of course, and you mean it, and you hang up the phone, and you go back to your dishes, and you have absolutely no idea that you have just said yes to the beginning of the worst thing that ever tried to happen to your family. It was almost 2 weeks before I could get out there. Between my own doctor's appointments and a church thing I couldn't move, and I have gone back and forth 100 times since on whether I should have dropped all of it and driven out that first day. I didn't. I told myself it was their business and their houseful, and I'd go at my regular time, and I'd see for myself then. I drove out on a gray Friday in the middle of November, hip aching before I even hit the highway, with an overnight bag and a tin of the lemon cookies Nora likes, thinking I was going to spend a nice long weekend in a sage green room. I was wrong about damn near all of it. The driveway told me something was wrong before I even got out of the car. There were 2 extra vehicles parked in it, a silver sedan I didn't know, and a maroon SUV with a cracked taillight held together by a strip of red packing tape. And they were parked the way people park when they've stopped thinking of a place as somewhere they're visiting. Nose in close to the garage, comfortable. My son's truck was gone, which meant he was already back out of state on the Cleveland job, which meant whatever was happening in that house was happening without him in it. I sat in my car at the curb for a second longer than I needed to, engine ticking as it cooled, and I looked at those 2 cars sitting in my son's driveway like they'd grown there, and something in my stomach went quiet and careful. I've learned to listen to that feeling. It took me about 50 years, but I learned. I parked on the street. I don't know why exactly, except that pulling into that driveway felt like I'd be adding a fourth car to a lot that was already full. And I wasn't going to do that at my own son's house. The front door was unlocked. I knocked anyway, out of 30 years of habit, and then I let myself in, and the first thing I saw was the shoes. There were shoes everywhere in that entryway, not Nora's neat little row by the door. A pile. Men's slippers on a rubber-backed mat I'd never seen before, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at the hardware store, sitting right on top of where Nora usually kept the braided oval rug her grandmother made her. The rug was gone. In its place was this thick industrial thing, and I stood there with my overnight bag on my shoulder and my tin of lemon cookies in my hand, and I looked at that mat where the rug should have been. And I want to tell you, it was such a small thing, a floor mat. But I've buried a husband and I've sat with a lot of families on the worst days of their lives. And I have learned that the small things are almost never small. They're just the big things, cut up into pieces you can't quite complain about. Then I heard the voices in the kitchen. There were 4 people at the table when I came around the corner. Nora's mother, Paulette, whom I'd met exactly twice, both times at the wedding, sitting at the head of the table like she'd been born to it. A younger woman I placed after a second as Nora's little sister, Sloane, 29 and glued to her phone. An older man in a cardigan who had to be Roland, and Lord, he looked rough, gray in the face, thinner than a man ought to be, with that scooped out. Look, people get after somebody cracks their chest open and puts them back together. And Nora, my Nora, standing at the counter, not sitting at her own table, standing with a dish towel in her hands, wearing the expression of a woman who is being very, very pleasant. Paulette saw me first. She lit right up. "Corinne," she said, like we were old friends, like she'd been expecting me for hours. And she got up and came around and took both my hands in hers. And her hands were cool and dry, and she smelled like somebody else's perfume in my son's kitchen. She said, "We've heard so much. We're just thrilled. Come in," as though it were her kitchen to welcome me into. And maybe you think I'm being unkind, reading all that into a hello, but you weren't there. You didn't hear the ownership in it. Come in. To a house I helped pay for, from a woman who'd been living in it for 11 days. I said something polite. I don't remember what. I hugged Roland gentle, because he looked like a stiff wind would fold him, and he shook my hand after with both of his and thanked me for coming. And there was something so tired and decent in the man's face that I felt a pull of sympathy for him that never once went away, not even later when everything came apart. Remember that. Roland was never the problem. Roland was one more thing that got done to. Then somebody, I think it was Paulette, said the thing about where I'd sleep. She said it real bright. She said, "Now, we've got you all set up. The sectional down in the basement pulls right out, and it is just so comfortable. And Sloane's got the guest room, but the basement's got its own little bathroom right there, so you won't have to come up in the night." She said it like she was doing me a kindness. She said it like it was already settled, like there'd been a meeting about my sleeping arrangements that I somehow wasn't invited to in the house I helped buy. I am 63 years old. I've got a hip that files a formal complaint every time it rains. And I stood there in that kitchen and I understood, all at once and very clearly, that in 11 days these people had reorganized the entire house down to, and including where the woman who paid for the down payment was allowed to lay her head. And nobody in that room thought there was one single thing strange about it. That's what got me, not the basement. The ease of it. I said, "Oh, don't you worry about me. I'll figure something out." And I set my lemon cookies on the counter, and I went to find my daughter-in-law, because she had disappeared out of the kitchen the second the sleeping arrangements came up, and I had a pretty good idea of why. She was in the laundry room. It's a narrow little room off the side of the kitchen, barely room to turn around. Washer and dryer, and a folding counter and a window that looks out on the side yard. Nora was standing with her back against the dryer and her arms crossed over her chest, and she'd been crying. Not right that second, but recent. The kind of recent where your face hasn't finished putting itself back together, where the red hasn't gone out of your eyes yet. I stepped in and I pulled the door shut behind me, quiet, and the two of us stood in that little room with the smell of dryer sheets, and I said, "Honey, what is going on?" And she said, "I'm so sorry about the basement." That's the first thing out of her mouth. She's apologizing to me. She's been crying in a laundry room in her own house, and the first thing she can think to do is say sorry to me about a couch. I took her by the arm, gentle, and I said, "Nora, do not you dare apologize to me. Not for one thing. I did not drive 2 hours to have you say sorry to me in a laundry room. Now tell me what is going on." And she did the thing that just about broke my heart. She smiled, this bright, awful, holding it together smile. And she said it was fine. Everything was fine. Her folks needed somewhere to be while her dad healed up, and it was just an adjustment. That was all. Everybody was still finding the rhythm of it, and it was fine. I said, "Nora," and I just waited. Because I've learned that too. You ask once, and then you shut your mouth, and you wait, and you let the quiet do the work, because the quiet is stronger than any question you could ask. She looked down at the floor, that gray floor with the little white veins in it that I helped her pick out at the flooring store 2 years back. Her and me arguing happily over samples while Wesley pretended to have an opinion. She looked at that floor a long moment, and then real quiet, like she was confessing to something. She started listing it out. Her mother had rearranged the kitchen, moved the whole spice situation, reorganized the pantry by what Paulette called a sensible system, which meant Nora couldn't find her own cinnamon in her own house. Her mother had commented on how Nora loaded the dishwasher, and on the thread count of the guest room sheets, and on the fact that there wasn't any bread in the house because Nora and Wesley had been eating mostly grain-free for a year now, which apparently was its own little scandal. Sloane had borrowed Nora's good cardigan without asking and gotten something greasy on the sleeve. And her mother, Nora said, had taken over the family filing box. I said, "The what now?" "The box," Nora said. "You know the one." And I did know the one, because I'm the one who told her to make it. 2 Christmases ago. A proper accordion file for the important paper, the deed, the mortgage statements, the insurance, the car titles, the wills, all of it in one place where you can put your hand on it in an emergency. Because I have watched too many families tear themselves apart hunting for a document in a dead man's desk. Nora had made herself a good one, kept it in the little cabinet in the den. Her mother, Nora said, had reorganized it to make it more logical, to help. I sat down on the edge of the washing machine, which was cool and solid under me, and I let that settle. Because here is what you have to understand about the way this works. And I say this as somebody who spent 31 years watching it happen to other people from behind a desk. Not one of those things is a crime. Not one of them is even really an insult. Not on its own. Not if you hold it up by itself in good light. The spice rack, the sheets, the cardigan. Every single one of them comes with a perfectly reasonable explanation, delivered kindly, usually with a smile. The light's better for reading labels over by the window. I was only making an observation about the sheets, sweetheart. I was just trying to help with the filing. And what happened to Nora, is that after 11 days of one reasonable little adjustment at a time, a woman looks up and finds she is a guest in her own life, and she cannot for the life of her point to the moment it happened, because there was no moment. There was just a slow tide, coming in so gentle you don't feel your feet go under. I asked her how long they were staying. She said her mother had mentioned Thanksgiving. That was 3 weeks out. I asked her if she'd talked to Wesley. She said he was trying. He really was. But he was 300 miles away, and every time they talked it was late and he was exhausted, and she didn't want to load him up. And anyway, her mom was so good at making it all sound reasonable that by the time she got off the phone with Wesley, she half wondered if she was the one being difficult. And she looked at me when she said that, really looked at me. And I saw a thing in her face I recognized, because I had worn it myself, a long time ago, in a marriage before Ellis that I don't talk about. It's the look of a person who has been talked out of their own gut feeling so many times that they've started to think Maybe the feeling was the problem all along. Maybe they're just too sensitive. Maybe they're the crazy one. I told her, honey, listen to me. What you're feeling is real. You are not crazy, and you are not difficult, and you are not too sensitive. Whatever's going on in this house, your gut is right about it. Do you hear me? Your gut is right. She laughed, that short kind of laugh that isn't a happy one. And she wiped her face with the back of her wrist and said she needed to get dinner started before her mother did it for her again. And she went back out to the kitchen. And I sat there on the washing machine a second longer. And that's when I saw it. There was a little stack of mail and paper on the folding counter next to me, the kind of pile that migrates into a laundry room when the kitchen table's been taken over by other people. Bills, mostly. A grocery flyer. And sitting right on top, a little business card, cream-colored, good stock. I picked it up without really thinking about it, the way you do. Dale Ruskin, it said, senior loan officer. And under that, the name of a mortgage company I knew. Because in 31 years off Main Street, you get to know which outfits do clean work and which ones you warn people about. And Ruskin's outfit was one I'd warned people about. And underneath the card, half sticking out, was a manila folder. And I did the thing you are not supposed to do. I nudged it open with one finger. It was a loan application, a refinance, partly filled out, in a handwriting that was not Nora's and was not my son's. And it was not a regular refinance, the kind where you just chase a better rate. I knew that at a glance, because reading these was my whole entire working life. There was a number written in the box for cash out, a big one. Somebody was pulling money out of my son's house, and nobody, in 11 days, had said one word to me about it. I closed the folder. I set the card back exactly where it had been, face down the way I found it, and I sat in that little laundry room with the dryer ticking as it cooled. And I want to tell you, every single thing I thought I understood about what was going on in that house rearranged itself, quiet and complete, like tumblers falling in a lock. This was never about a spice rack. I didn't sleep at the house that night. I drove 7 minutes down the road to a Hampton Inn off the highway exit, and I paid for my own room with my own credit card. And I want to be honest with you about why. Because it wasn't the hip and it wasn't the basement sectional. Not really. It was that I needed a door I could close and a room where nobody was managing me. 11 days those people had been running that house, and I'd been inside of it for about 4 hours. And already I could feel it working on me. That low, pleasant pressure to go along, to not make it weird, to be easy. And I needed to get out from under it long enough to think straight, because I had a bad feeling I was going to need to think very straight indeed. I lay on top of the hotel bedspread with my shoes still on, and I stared at the ceiling and I called my son. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been sitting with the phone in his hand, waiting the way you wait when part of you already knows. I could hear a job site behind him, that far-off clang and beep 300 miles away in Cleveland. I said, Wesley, tell me about the refinance. There was a silence on the line that went on about 2 seconds too long. And in that silence, I heard everything I needed to hear. He didn't say what refinance. That's the tell. An innocent man says what refinance. My son said, real careful. Mom, who told you about that? Nobody told me, I said. I read it off your kitchen counter. Now you tell me what in the hell is going on. And he gave me the version he'd been given, which is a thing I've watched happen 100 times. A good person passing along a bad story in perfect good faith because they trust the person who handed it to them. He said Roland's medical bills were going to be brutal, that the bypass and the hospital stay and the rehab were going to run tens of thousands even with the Medicare, and that Paulette had come to them just heartsick about it. And the idea was that Nora and Wesley would refinance, pull a little equity out of the house since they had so much of it, and help her folks get through the hump, and they'd all pay it back over time. Family helping family. He said Paulette had even found the loan guy, taken all the hassle off their plate, real thoughtful about it. He said it like it was a kindness she'd done them. I closed my eyes. I said, Wesley's, did you sign anything? He said he'd signed some things. Yeah, a few weeks back, before he left for Cleveland. some preliminary paperwork. Paulette had a notary come to the house. Made it easy. He'd signed and Nora had signed, and he'd gone off to the job and figured the rest would sort itself out. You signed loan documents, I said, that a notary brought to your kitchen table, arranged by your mother-in-law, and you didn't read them. There it was again. That little breath, that 9-year-old hitch, 300 miles down a phone line, 35 years old. He said, Mom, I was slammed. I trusted Nora. Nora trusted her mom, it seemed like. I said, I know. I know it did. And I told him I loved him, and I told him to get some sleep, and I told him I'd handle it. And I hung up before I said something in anger that I'd have to drive back and apologize for. Because I wasn't angry at Wesley. Not really. You cannot be angry at a man for the same thing that's about to happen to his wife. They both signed what they were handed by somebody they loved, and that is not stupidity. That is what trust looks like, right up until the second it turns into the thing that ruins you. I barely slept. My hip ached and the mattress was a stranger, and I kept seeing that cash-out number in my head, that big ugly number in somebody else's handwriting. In the morning, I drove back, and I brought donuts, because I have found that it is very hard for people to keep secrets from a woman who has just handed them a donut, and because I needed a reason to be in that house all day that nobody would question. Nora was at the sink. Paulette had gone with Sloan to run some errands. Praise God. And Roland was resting. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the house was quiet enough to hear the refrigerator. I set the donuts down and I said, Honey, I want to help you get that filing box straightened back out. Your mother's system is going to drive you up a wall, and I've done this professionally for 30 years. Let me just put it right for you. And Nora, God bless her, said that would be wonderful, because she was so tired and so grateful for anybody offering to take one single thing off her plate that she didn't stop to wonder why her mother-in-law wanted an afternoon alone with the family paperwork. She got the box out of the den cabinet and set it on the kitchen table and went back to her sink. And I sat down with it, and I put my reading glasses on, and I went to work. Now, I want you to understand what I am when I sit down in front of a box like that. I am not a nosy old woman. I am 31 years of training. I have read more deeds and mortgages and title commitments and probate filings than most lawyers, because the lawyer signs the letter and goes home, and the paralegal is the one who actually reads every line. I can look at a stack of documents the way a mechanic listens to an engine. I know what healthy sounds like, and I know what that little tick means that everybody else drives around for 6 months until the whole thing throws a rod. Paulette's reorganization was very tidy. I'll give her that. Everything crisp, everything labeled in a neat hand. And it took me about 20 minutes of quiet reading to find the tick. It was folded in behind the current mortgage statement, in the same slot, like it belonged there. It did not belong there. It was deed, a quitclaim deed, blank in a couple of the important places, but mostly drawn up, and I read it twice to be sure I wasn't seeing things, and I was not. Somebody had drawn up a quitclaim deed that would add Roland and Paulette Harmon to the title of my son's house. Let me tell you what that means in plain English, because most folks hear deed and their eyes glaze, and that glaze is exactly what people like Paulette are counting on. A quitclaim deed is how you change who owns a piece of property, and this one would have taken my son's house, which belonged to Wesley and Nora, and made it belong to Wesley and Nora and Roland and Paulette, all 4 of them together. It would have carved 2 more owners into a house those 2 owners had no business owning. And once your name is on a title, getting it off is a fight. It is not a favor you can just take back. It is not helping. It is a claim, a permanent legal claim, on the single biggest thing most people will ever own. And it was sitting in the file folded up behind the mortgage statement like a snake in a woodpile, waiting for 2 more signatures and a notary. I sat there and I felt my heart going, and I made myself breathe slow and keep reading, because now I needed to understand the whole shape of it, the refinance to pull cash out, and the deed to add the parents to the title. 2 separate things. And here's what a lifetime of reading these does for you. It let me see that they weren't 2 things at all. They were one thing wearing 2 coats. The refinance got the money out of the house today. The deed got Paulette a permanent legal foothold in the house forever. One for now, one for keeps. And both of them dressed up in the exact same story. We're all just helping poor Roland. We're all just being a family about this. But it was the money that finally gave the whole thing away. Because I sat there with the refinance paperwork on one side, and I did the arithmetic. And the arithmetic did not work. I know what a bypass costs a Medicare patient. I have settled estates for people who died the hard way, and I have seen the bills, the itemized horror of them. And I will tell you that for a man with Roland's coverage, with his Medicare and what looked like a decent supplement policy right there in the file, the actual out of pocket for that surgery was going to be real money. Sure, but it was going to be thousands, maybe low tens of thousands if things went sideways. It was not going to be the number in that cash out box. The number in that cash out box was more than double any medical bill that man could plausibly rack up. It was a number with a life of its own. It was a number that had nothing to do with a hospital. So I sat there in that quiet kitchen with my daughter-in-law washing dishes 12 feet away, humming a little to herself. No idea. And I asked myself the only question that mattered. If that money is not going to Roland's doctors, then where in the hell is it going? Because somebody had done real work here. Somebody had found the loan guy and drawn up the deed and arranged the notary and folded the whole thing into a story so warm and so reasonable that a decent, exhausted young couple would sign it with tears in their eyes, thinking they were being good to a sick old man. That is not the work of a person having a panicked idea in a hospital waiting room. That is the work of a person who came into this house with a plan already built. I have watched a lot of people get robbed in my life. I want to tell you something I learned, and I want you to sit with it. Because I think some of you listening have seen this exact thing in your own family and told yourself you were imagining it. The most dangerous person in any house is not the stranger at the door. It is the one already at the table, the one everybody trusts, the one who says it's for the family so many times and so sweetly that by the time you count the silverware, it's already gone. Have you ever felt it? That prickle at the back of your neck when the numbers in your own family stopped adding up, and everybody around you kept smiling and telling you it was nothing. If you have, do me a favor and tell me about it down in the comments, because I promise you are not the only one, and I promise you were not imagining it. I closed the box. I sat with my hands flat on top of it for a minute, and then I heard the garage door start to grind up, and Paulette's voice out in the driveway, bright and carrying, home from her errands. And I had about 11 seconds to decide what kind of afternoon this was going to be. Here is a thing I have learned about myself over 63 years. When my heart is going the fastest, I get the slowest. Some people fly apart under pressure. I go still. It's the only useful thing my mother ever handed down to me, that stillness. And I put it on that afternoon like a coat. I did not put the box away. I want you to notice that, because it was the first real decision I made in all of this. Every instinct in a house like that one, a house running on smoothness, tells you to tuck the ugly thing back where you found it and keep the peace and wait for a better time. And there is never a better time. That's the trap. The smooth people count on you waiting for a better time. So I left that box sitting right there in the middle of the kitchen table, open with the quitclaim deed on top and the refinance folder beside it, squared up neat. And I got myself a cup of coffee and I sat down behind it. And I waited. Paulette came in through the garage with a grocery bag on each arm and Sloane trailing behind her thumbing at her phone. And Paulette was mid-sentence about something, the checkout line, the price of something. And she came around the corner into the kitchen and she saw Miss Smith sitting there. And she saw the box. I watched it happen on her face. I want to describe it careful because it went by fast and it told me everything. First, there was the bright social nothing, the same lit-up hostess face she'd greeted me with the day before. Then her eyes went down to the table, to the box, to the deed sitting on top of it, and for about half of 1 second, that bright face just went out, like a room when the power cuts. There was somebody else in there behind it, somebody cold and quick and calculating, doing math, and I saw her. I saw the real one, just for that half a second before the lights came back on, And the hostess came back, and she said, "Oh, Corinne, you didn't have to fuss with all that. That's such a mess. Let me just." And she set her grocery bags down and reached for the box, easy, casual, to take it away from me. I put my hand flat on top of it. I didn't grab it. I didn't snatch. I just laid my hand down on the lid, quiet, and I looked up at her, and I said, "Paulette, sit down a minute. I want to talk to you about this refinance." Nora had turned around from the sink. Sloane had stopped thumbing her phone. Roland's door was down the hall, and I didn't know if he was awake. And Paulette stood there with her hand halfway to the box that my hand was already resting on, and I watched her decide, in real time, which version of herself to be. She could be confused. She could be offended. She could be hurt. She had the whole wardrobe. And what she picked, after a second, was warm and a little sad. The wise mother. And she pulled a chair out and sat down across from me and folded her hands and said, "Of course. It's been so hard, Corinne. Roland's bills. You have no idea. We're all just doing what we can for family." And that was the moment. That right there. It was for the family. She reached for it like a handrail, the way she'd reached for it 100 times in 11 days, because it had worked 100 times on Nora, on Wesley, on Roland, on Sloane, on everybody who'd ever loved her. That phrase, for the family, the magic words that turned taking into giving. And I set the folder down on the table between us. And I told Paulette that I had read enough closing documents in 31 years to know exactly what this one was. She stopped smiling. I said, "This is a cash-out refinance. Paulette, do you know what that is?" "Because I do. This pulls money straight out of the equity in this house. This house. Wesley and Nora's house. And the number in this box right here, I put one finger on it. This number is more than twice what Roland's whole surgery could cost a man with his coverage. I've read the man's insurance. It's right here in the file you organized so nice. So I've been sitting here doing arithmetic, and I cannot make it work. And I keep landing on the same question. This money isn't going to Roland's doctors. Then where is it going?" Paulette's hands were still folded, but the folding had changed. I watched her knuckles. She said, "Well, there's the recovery, the rehab, all sorts of expenses you're not thinking of. It adds up so fast you'd be shocked." I said, "And then there's this." And I lifted the quitclaim deed off the top of the box, and I laid it down flat where the light was good, facing her. And I said, "This is a deed, Paulette. This one puts you and Roland on the title of this house. Do you understand what I'm saying to these kids?" I looked at Nora when I said it. I said, "Do you understand what this means? This doesn't help your parents pay a bill. This makes your parents co-owners of your home. Forever. Right alongside you. It carves the two of them into the deed of the house you and my son bought. And once that ink is dry, it is a war and a lawyer to ever get it back off." And that is when Nora crossed the kitchen. She hadn't said a word. She came over slow, drying her hands on the dish towel. And she leaned over the table and she looked at the refinance folder, at the page on top, the one with the signature lines. And I watched my daughter-in-law go absolutely still, the same stillness I go to. And she reached down and touched the paper with one finger, at the bottom, at a signature. She said, real quiet, "That's my name." I said, "I know, honey." She said, "I didn't." She stopped. She said, "I don't remember signing this one." There was the stack Mom's notary brought, the day before Wesley left. There were so many. She kept saying, sign here, initial here. And I was on my way to a shift, and she looked up at her mother. She said, "Mom, I don't remember this page." And the kitchen got so quiet. I could hear the second hand on the stove clock. I have thought a lot since about what a decent person would have done in the half-second Paulette had right there. A decent person, caught, would have crumbled, would have said, "Oh God, oh honey, I'm sorry. I got in over my head. I panicked. Forgive me." There was a version of that afternoon where Paulette broke down and it all came out soft and we cried and started fixing it together. I would have taken that version. I'd have worked with that woman till dawn. That is not what she did. What she did was get bigger. She sat up straight and something came into her voice that had steel under the sugar. And she said she did not appreciate being interrogated in her own. And she caught it, that word. Her own, she caught it a half beat too late, but I heard it and Nora heard it. Her own in a house that was not hers. And she covered it and went on, being ambushed by Wesley's mother the minute her back was turned, after everything she'd sacrificed, driving up here, leaving her whole life, to nurse Roland and hold this family together while everybody else went about their business. And this was the thanks. She was good. I want to be fair to her even now. She was genuinely good at it. Inside of 20 seconds, she had taken a table where she was the one caught with a forged signature and a hidden deed. And she had made herself the wounded party, the exhausted mother, the one being attacked. If I had been Nora, tired and guilty and raised by this woman, trained from a child to fold the second mom's voice did that thing, I might have caved right there. I watched Nora waver. I watched 33 years of it pull at her, the reflex to apologize, to smooth it, to decide she was the one being difficult. And I said, quietly into the middle of Paulette's speech, I said, Paulette, whose handwriting is the cash-out number in. She stopped. I said, it's not Nora's. It's not Wesley's. I've got 3 years of their handwriting in this box to compare it to. So it's yours, isn't it? You filled in the number. And Nora doesn't remember signing this page. So you tell me, right now, in front of your daughter, how her name got onto a document she doesn't remember, in your handwriting, for an amount of money that has nothing to do with your husband's surgery. And Paulette looked at me, and the warmth was gone, all the way gone. The hostess and the wise mother and the wounded party, all of it burned off. And for the second time that afternoon, I was looking at the real one, the cold, quick one who did math. And she didn't answer the question. She looked at me with something close to hatred, and she said, very low, very even, you should not have come this weekend. And I said, no, I imagine I shouldn't have. And I imagine that was the whole idea, wasn't it? Doing this while I was 2 hours away and Wesley was 300 miles gone, and the only person in the house was a girl too tired and too kind to make you stop. Nobody said anything. Sloan had gone white by the refrigerator. Down the hall, I heard a door open. Roland's voice, thin and confused, called out, asking what was going on, asking if everything was all right. And Paulette got up from the table, smooth as anything, and put her hostess face back on like it had never come off, and called back down the hall, everything's fine. Honey, you go on and rest. And she picked up her grocery bags off the counter and started putting the milk away, like it was any other afternoon in the world. But her hands were shaking, just a little, just enough. I looked at Nora. Nora was looking at that signature on the paper, her own name, in her own hand, on a page she'd been walked through too fast to read. And her face wasn't doing the apology thing anymore. It had gone somewhere else, somewhere harder and clearer, and a long time coming. She looked up at me and she said, I need to know where the money's going. And I said, good girl. So do I. And I think I know how to find out. I have a friend named Lorna Vance. Lorna and I came up together, back before either of us had gray in our hair, working the title side of the business. Her at the title company and me at the law office. Two young women learning that the whole world runs on documents that nobody reads. We spent 30 years on opposite ends of the same phone calls, closing houses, chasing down liens, untangling the messes people make when they die without a will. She retired a couple years before I did. We still have lunch, and Lorna Vance can pull a public record faster than anybody I have ever known. And more to the point, she still knows everybody worth knowing at every recorder's office and title outfit between here and the river. I called her from the Hampton Inn parking lot that evening, sitting in my car with the heater running, because I did not want to have this conversation inside that house. I told her what I had, the refinance, the cash-out number that didn't fit, the quitclaim deed folded in the file, the notary Paulette arranged, Nora's signature on a page she didn't remember, and Lorna, who has heard everything, went quiet the way she does when a thing is bad. And then she said, Corinne, honey, You're only looking at one house. You're looking at the kid's house. If I'm running a play like this, you don't look at the house they want. You look at the house they've got. What's the parent's situation? And I felt like a fool because of course, 31 years and I'd been so focused on protecting Wesley and Nora's house that I never once turned around and asked the obvious question, which is where did these people come from? And what did they leave behind them out past Dayton? I said, I don't know. Can you find out? She said, give me their names and give me till morning. I gave her Roland and Paulette Harmon and the town out past Dayton, and I hung up, and I did not sleep much that night either. I was starting to feel every one of my 63 years. Lorna called me back at 10 past 8 the next morning, and I could tell from the first word out of her mouth that she'd found the whole thing, because her voice had that flat, careful sound people get when they're about to tell you something true and heavy. She said, Corinne, the Harmons are losing their house. And then she laid it out for me, clean and complete, the way only somebody who's read 10,000 of these can. The Harmon's house out past Dayton was in foreclosure. It was a matter of public record, filed months back, right there in the county, for anybody to see who knew to look. And it wasn't the regular kind, where somebody just falls behind on their payments because life got hard. There was a second mortgage on that house, a big one, taken out a little over a year ago. And the money from it, Lorna said, near as she could tell from the paper trail, had gone into some investment thing of Paulette's, some opportunity, some sure thing that a friend of a friend had gotten her into, and it had gone to zero the way those things do. All of it, gone. And now the second mortgage was in default, and the first was right behind it, and the whole house was sliding toward the auction block. And the Harmons were going to lose the roof over their heads inside a few months. There it was. That was the money. That was where the cash out number came from. It was never a hospital bill. It was a hole. Paulette had blown a hole in her own life the size of a house. And she'd spent a year now trying to find another house to fill it with. And along had come her son-in-law's chest cracking open. And she'd looked at that catastrophe and seen a door, a reason to move in, a reason to be trusted with the paperwork, a reason to be in the house, at the table, holding the pen. I sat down hard on the edge of the hotel bed, and Lorna said, there's more, and you're not going to like it. And she told me the part that turned my stomach all the way over. That second mortgage, the one that started the whole disaster, the one Paulette took out to feed her sure thing. It had two signatures on it, Paulette's and Roland's. Except, Lorna said, here's the thing. She'd pulled the date. And the date on that second mortgage was inside the window of something else she'd found, because Lorna is thorough. Lorna is a bloodhound. About 14 months back, Paulette had gotten herself appointed under a durable power of attorney for Roland. A durable power of attorney, for those of you who've never had the misfortune, is a document that lets one person sign legally on behalf of another. It's a good and necessary thing when it's used right, when a person is failing and needs somebody they trust to handle their affairs. It is a loaded gun when it's used wrong. And Paulette had gotten herself that power over Roland's affairs. And then a few weeks later, Roland's signature had appeared on a $200,000 mortgage against the house he'd paid on for 40 years. Now, I want to be careful here, because I don't know for a fact what was in Roland's head 14 months ago. Maybe he understood. Maybe he signed it himself, clear-eyed, and it's all clean. But I have met Roland. I have shaken that man's hand and looked in his face. And I had already noticed, in the 2 days I'd been around him, that he'd lost the thread of a conversation more than once, that he'd asked me the same question twice inside an hour, that there was a softness and a confusion in him that I had chalked up to the surgery, to the anesthesia, to a hard recovery. And now I sat on that hotel bed and I wondered how much of that softness went back further than the surgery. I wondered whether Paulette had watched her husband start to slip, and instead of protecting him, had gotten herself a power of attorney and used the man's own failing mind and his own good name to sign for money she then lit on fire. I want to tell you, I have done a lot of hard things in a law office. I have told widows their husbands left them nothing. I have watched grown children fight over a dead mother's ring. But something about that, about Paulette using Roland like a rubber stamp, using the decline of a man who trusted her, that landed in me somewhere that still hasn't quite healed, because it reframed the whole thing. It meant Roland wasn't a partner in any of this. Roland was the first victim. Before Nora, before Wesley, before my $60,000, there was Roland, sitting in a chair somewhere getting confused about what day it was, while his wife guided his hand across a signature line. And now she'd cracked his chest open, or life had, and she'd loaded him into the car and driven him to his daughter's house, not just to heal, but to be the reason. The sympathetic, sick old man who made everybody so soft and so guilty that nobody would think to check the math. I drove back to the house. I didn't bring donuts this time. Sloane met me at the door, Nora's little sister, 29, the one who'd spent the whole visit staring at her phone. Except her eyes were red and her phone was nowhere in sight. And she stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind her before I could go in. And she said, real low and fast, "Is it true? Nora called me last night. Is it true about the deed? About the money?" And I looked at this girl, and I made a decision. And I said, "Sloane, what do you already know? Because I think you know something. I've watched you in there. You've been sitting on something this whole time." And she started to cry, right there on the porch in the cold. And it came out of her in a rush, the way a thing comes out when a person has been holding it too long, and somebody finally gives them permission. She said she'd known about the foreclosure for months. Her mother had told her, sworn her to secrecy, said it would kill her father if it got out, said they had a plan to fix it, and Sloane just had to keep quiet and not upset Nora with it. She said her mother was so good at making the secret feel like love, like Sloane was protecting the family by saying nothing. She said she hadn't known about the deed, hadn't known they were doing it to Nora's house. She thought the plan was. She didn't know what she thought. She'd just done what her mother said, because that's what you do. You do what mom says, and now. And she looked at me, wrecked. And she said the thing that I think is the truest thing anybody said in that whole house. She said, "She makes you feel crazy for not going along. Every time. And you spend so long feeling crazy that you forget you were right." I have thought about the way people get pulled into these things. We like to imagine we'd be the hero. We'd catch it. We'd say something. We'd never let somebody run this kind of play on the people we love. But that is not how it works. And I want to be honest with you about that, because I think some of you are carrying guilt for a time you stayed quiet. It does not come at you as a crime you could refuse. It comes at you as a secret you're keeping out of love. It comes wrapped in your own decency. Paulette didn't recruit Sloane by making her wicked. She recruited her by making silence feel like loyalty. And she'd have done the same to every one of us, given time and a good enough reason. And don't you dare think you're above it. Because the people it happens to aren't stupid or weak. They're loving. And loving is the exact door these people walk through. I put my hand on Sloane's shoulder, and I told her she wasn't crazy and she wasn't a bad daughter. And I told her the only way out was through, and that we were going to need her to tell the truth, out loud in front of Nora. And she nodded and wiped her face and said, "Okay, okay." And I turned to go inside, to sit Nora down with all of it, the foreclosure, the investment, the power of attorney, Roland's poor confused signature, the whole rotten shape of it. And that was when Nora came out onto the porch, holding her phone in a way I didn't like, white in the face. And she said, "Corinne, I just called the loan office to try to stop it, to pull my signature." I said, "And," she said, "the man, Ruskin, he said, it's too late. He said we closed. He said the loan funded yesterday. It's done." And the ground kind of dropped out from under me, because I knew what that meant. It meant the money was already gone out of the house. It meant we weren't looking at a thing we could stop before it happened. We were looking at a thing that had already happened. Day one, done. Funded, the equity already pulled out of my son's home and sitting in an account with Paulette's fingerprints all over it. Too late. I stood on that cold porch and my mind was going a mile a minute. 31 years of paper flipping past behind my eyes. looking for the one thing, the one card. Because there is almost always one card if you know where to look. And then I found it. And I said out loud to nobody, "What day did they close?" And Nora said, "Yesterday, Tuesday." And I said out loud, "Tuesday." And I started counting on my fingers like a child. Wednesday, Thursday, and I stopped on Thursday. And I felt something come up in my chest that I had not felt in that whole miserable weekend. Because Thursday was Thanksgiving. And I turned to Nora and I said, "Honey, get your coat and find me a pen. It is not too late." They think it's too late, and Ruskin's counting on you believing him. But I spent 31 years reading the exact page they never think we'll read. And I am telling you right now, we have got until Saturday night, and we are going to use every hour of it. Let me tell you about the right of rescission, because it is the whole reason my son still owns his house, and because almost nobody knows it exists, which is exactly how the Dale Ruskins of this world like it. When you take a certain kind of loan against the home you live in, a cash-out refinance on your own main residence with a new lender, the federal law gives you 3 business days to change your mind. 3 days. No reason required. No penalty. To send written notice and unwind the whole thing like it never happened. It is called the right of rescission, and it lives in the Truth in Lending Act. And it is there precisely because Congress knew, decades ago, that people get talked into borrowing against their homes by smooth voices at kitchen tables, and that sometimes you need one cold, sober morning to realize what you signed. 3 business days. And here is the part Ruskin was counting on Nora not knowing. Business days do not mean the next 3 days on the calendar. They count every day but Sunday and federal holidays. The loan funded on Tuesday. So the clock started Wednesday. That was day 1. Thursday was Thanksgiving, a federal holiday. Does not count. The clock just stops and waits. Friday, day 2. Saturday, and yes, Saturday counts. Day 3, which meant the window to kill this loan did not close until midnight on Saturday night. Ruskin told Nora it was too late on a Friday morning. He looked at a young, tired woman on the phone and he told her the door was shut. And the door was not shut. The door had almost 2 full days left on it, and he knew it. And he lied. I have thought a lot about that lie. I think it tells you everything about who was really running this, and that it was never really Paulette alone, that there are men who make a living standing just close enough to a Paulette to catch what falls. I sat Nora down at the kitchen table, the same table, and I said, "Here is what we are going to do, and we are going to do it exactly right, because if we do it sloppy, they will fight it and we will lose. We were not going to just call and yell. We were going to send written notice of rescission, both borrowers, in writing, delivered so there was proof it arrived before midnight Saturday. And we were not going to do it on a prayer and a post-it note. I called a lawyer. I want to be clear about that, because I was a paralegal, not an attorney. 31 years of knowing exactly where the line is and never once crossing it. I know how to read the page. I am not allowed to be the one who signs the letter. So I called a real estate attorney I trusted, a woman I'd worked closing tables with for 15 years. And I got her on the phone on the Friday after Thanksgiving, which is its own kind of miracle. And she confirmed every word of it, and she drew up the notice right. And she told us how to send it so it would stand up, certified, return receipt, the works. But it needed both signatures, both borrowers, Nora and Wesley. And Wesley was 300 miles away in Cleveland. I called my son, and I did not soften it. I said, "Wesley, your mother-in-law forged part of a loan against your house, and the only way to undo it closes at midnight tomorrow, and I need you in this kitchen with a pen in your hand before then." And there was about 1 second of silence. And then my son, who I have watched avoid hard things his whole life, who stayed neutral and out of state while his wife drowned, said, "I'm leaving now." And he hung up, and he drove through the night, 5 hours with 1 stop for gas and coffee. And he walked into that kitchen at 4 in the morning, gray-faced and unshaven. And the first thing he did was go to Nora and put his arms around her and say, over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I left you here with this. I'm sorry." And you know, I have been hard on Wesley in the telling of this, and I want to be fair to him now. because staying away is a choice, and he made it. But coming home is also a choice, and he made that one too. And he made it inside of 1 second flat. Some of you are sitting there thinking about somebody in your own family who checked out when it got hard. A husband, a brother, a somebody who let you carry it alone. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honest down in the comments. When it finally counted, did they show up? Because it matters. Both things matter, the leaving and the coming back. And a person is made of both. They signed it at the kitchen table just after dawn on Saturday. The two of them, side by side, the way they should have signed everything from the start. Slow reading every word, and then I drove with Nora to send it, certified and return receipt, with hours to spare. And she was the one who handed it across the counter, her own 2 hands, and got the little green card back as proof. She did that, not me. I want that on the record. I found the door. Nora walked through it. The loan was dead. The money had to go back. The equity restored. The whole thing unwound like the law says it must. My son's house was safe. And then there was the other thing, the harder thing, the thing no law fixes, which was the family sitting in the wreckage of it. We had it out that afternoon in the living room, all of us, and Paulette, cornered with the proof laid out, and Sloane sitting right there ready to tell the truth. Paulette still tried. She cried real tears, and she said she'd only ever tried to hold the family together, that she was drowning and nobody had helped her, that a mother does what she has to do. And some of it, God help me, was even true. She was drowning. She was a 66-year-old woman about to lose her house with a failing husband and a hole in her life she could not climb out of, and she was terrified. And terror makes people do monstrous things and tell themselves it's love the whole way down. But then Roland spoke. He had been sitting in the corner in his cardigan, gray and quiet, and we had all half forgotten he was there. The way you forget a sick old man is in the room, which is its own small cruelty. And into a gap in Paulette's crying, Roland said, in a voice that was suddenly clear, clearer than I'd heard him the whole visit. He said, "Polly, did you sign my name?" And the room stopped. He said, "The house, our house. Did you sign my name on something?" And Paulette said, "Honey, you don't understand. You're not well. Let me." And Roland said, "No." And that one word, no, from that gentle failing man, was the loudest thing anybody said in 3 days. He said, "I know I've been slipping. I know it. But I signed things because you told me to, and I trusted you. And I want to know right now, in front of my girls. Did you use my name to take money I didn't know about?" And Paulette couldn't answer him. She just cried. And that was the answer. And Roland looked at Nora and at Sloane, his 2 daughters, and his face just came apart. And he said, "I never wanted to take anything from you girls. I never in my life. You have to know that. I didn't know." And Nora went to him and got down on her knees in front of his chair and took both his hands and said, "Daddy, I know. I know you didn't." And that right there was the only clean thing in the whole rotten business. An old man and his daughter on the floor, both of them wronged by the same hand, finding each other in it. The Harmons left the next morning. There was no big scene. Paulette had gone somewhere far away behind her own eyes, and she packed in silence, and she did not fight, and she did not apologize. Not really. Not the way that would have meant anything. Sloane drove them, because Paulette wasn't fit to and Roland couldn't. Before they left, we did the one merciful thing that was left to do, which was to sit down with Paulette and make her understand that we were not going to gather torches, that nobody was calling the police on the mother of this family if it could be helped, but that she was going to get real help, a nonprofit credit counselor for the debt, and an elder law attorney for Roland, a real one, to protect that man from ever being signed away again, including by her. We were not going to save her. That was the line, and I held it, and I made the kids hold it too. We were not going to pour Wesley and Nora's money into the hole to make Paulette's foreclosure disappear, because that hole has no bottom, and everybody who loves a Paulette learns that too late. She was going to face what she'd built, but she was not going to face it alone in a ditch, and she was going to face it with Roland protected from her. That was the most we owed her. And it was more than she'd earned. And we gave it anyway, because that's what you do. You give a little more than they earned, or else what are you? Roland shook my hand at the car. He held it in both of his, the way he had the first day, and he said, "Thank you." And he meant it in a way that went all the way down. I told him to take care of himself and to call that lawyer, and he said he would. Nora stood on the porch and watched the car until it turned the corner. And then she came back inside and sat down at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands. Not crying, just still, emptied out. And Wesley sat down next to her. And after a minute, I made a pot of coffee and set 2 mugs down in front of them and sat down myself. And the 3 of us just sat there in that kitchen with the coffee and the gray November light coming in the window, not saying much, because there wasn't much left to say. The filing box was back in the den cabinet, put right, everything where Nora keeps it. She'd taken it back out of her mother's system that same afternoon and reorganized the whole thing with her own 2 hands. And I want you to know she didn't ask me to help, and she didn't announce she was doing it. She just did it. Sat on the floor of the den and put her own life back in her own order, one folder at a time. That was the last thing I saw her do before I left, and it's the thing I choose to remember. I stayed through Sunday. I got up early that last morning, before either of them was awake, and I made eggs and toast the way I used to, when Wesley was small and the world hadn't started asking things of him yet. And I left the coffee in the pot, and I wrote a note that just said, "See you next month." And I let myself out quiet and drove home with the window cracked even though it was cold, because I have always loved the smell of November, that dry brown smell of the year letting go of things it doesn't need anymore. Here is what I keep thinking about. I keep thinking about that box. It sounds like such a small thing. A few folders of paper a woman moved from one shelf to another while she smiled and said she was only helping. But I read documents my whole life, and I know a house is never really about the house. It is about who gets to decide. Paulette was not a monster. She was a frightened woman who called control a kind of love, and who could explain each small step so gently that no single step ever seemed worth a fight. That is how it always works. Not one loud shove, but 100 quiet ones. Nora did not need saving. She needed one person to tell her that what she felt was real, and then to step back and let her put her own hands back on her own life. That is what we owe the people we love. The truth, and the room to use it.